Coming to you after a great dinner with a great mother and a great friend. It's One Wellness Nerd Out time! How you doing? What's up, buddy? You being a good boy? How you guys doing today? Happy When Wellness Nerd Out time, you nerds out there ready to hear about amino acid metabolism. And today we are going to begin our discussion on just that amino acid metabolism, right? Who's not interested in that? We all want to know how our proteins can be used to build muscle, to make energy, maybe even make some glucose. Yeah, now the aforementioned, right, the building muscle is talked about a lot. But amino acids also can be used to produce ATP indirectly, of course, and can also be used indirectly to promote gluconeogenesis, the production of new glucose, right? So let's start by describing how these amino acids are transformed into something that can achieve that, right? And that is through a process called transamination. And when we talk about transamination, all we mean is the transfer of an amino group from an amino acid over to a keto acid. Now, what's a keto acid? Well, keto acids, for the most part, are just Krebs cycle intermediates, aka citric acid cycle intermediates, right? And we've been talking a lot about cellular respiration recently, so you know that these shouldn't be any new terms really, but when we talk about, one of the ones we're going to be talking about today is involved in pyruvate oxidation. So, you know, just before the Krebs cycle, technically, but still all involved in aerobic processes of cellular respiration from pyruvate onward, right? Pyruvate downstream. And so when we have this transfer of an amino group to a keto acid in transamination, we also simultaneously have the transfer of oxygen from the keto acid to our amino acid. So what happens? Right? Well, if that amino acid loses the amino group and it gives it to the keto acid, and that keto acid loses oxygen and gives it to the amino acid, then we can form a new amino acid with that amino group on the keto acid, right? So that keto acid will form and become a new amino acid, and the keto acid giving its oxygen to the amino acid, that amino acid will now become a new keto acid. This process is reversible, okay? And it makes sense, you know, most are when we talk about cellular respiration and things like that. Now some aren't, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. But as for today, I just want to talk about a few amino acids that undergo transamination, and then thank you for tuning in. I can't see you from here, but I hope you get something out of this. We're going to talk about a few amino acids that are involved in transamination. Now, there are a ton of amino acids involved in transamination. In fact, most of them can undergo this process. There are only a few exceptions of amino acids that cannot go through transamination, and I think we got lysine, proline, threonine, and hydroxyproline are four that do not undergo transamination. But the important thing to realize here is, albeit we're only going to speak of 3 amino acids today, and I promise they're not BCAAs or L-glutamine, right? Because we've talked about those a lot. It's 3 we haven't talked about yet, which is exciting. Albeit we're only going to talk about 3, I want you to grasp the fact that so many of them can be converted, okay? So these aren't the only ones. They're just ones commonly used by the body in their conversion to keto acids, which are intermediates in cellular respiration. So let's start with alanine. So alanine can be converted via transamination, of course, into pyruvate. And we know that pyruvate is converted into acetyl-CoA, and then acetyl-CoA combines with oxaloacetate and goes through that citric acid, aka Krebs cycle, right? And then eventually we get our byproducts, we get our NADHs, our FADH2s, right? Things like that, our ATP, GTP, even CO2, right? And those byproducts can then go through the electron transport chain and produce large amounts of ATP, right? So indirectly, alanine may be used to promote ATP production if it's necessary. We prefer not to break down these amino acids. We don't want to break them down, right? It's if we have to. If you had glucose, it goes through the same pathway. You go through glycolysis, what are the byproducts? They're a couple pyruvate. So then those pyruvate, so if you had a bunch of sugar, you think you're going to be converting alanine into pyruvate? Well, this is one reason they say carbohydrate stores in your muscles as glycogen that can be broken down into glucose and then used for energy, right? Will prevent amino acid breakdown. Well, that makes so much sense. Makes so much sense, right? At least glycogen stores in the liver and they're broken down and insulin carries them to the tissues and yada, 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 right? But but the important thing to realize here is we would prefer to break down other things first. Now, the second one we'll talk about is aspartate. Not aspartame, the artificial sweetener, is a big difference. Aspartate. So when we talk about aspartate and what it's converted into via transamination, that would be the keto acid oxaloacetate. So we were just talking about oxaloacetate, right? How it combines with acetyl-CoA to go through that citric acid cycle, and so it could have the same fate. And so it could continue along the same path. We produce our byproducts, we go to the electron transport chain, we get ATP. So it could be used to produce energy as well, could aspartate, another amino acid. And the last one we'll talk about today is glutamate. I'm sure you heard about glutamate. This is probably the most frequently talked about one in terms of transamination, at least one of them. And if you research it, it'll probably be like the first one that'll come up. And when glutamate undergoes transamination, it becomes alpha-ketoglutarate. So where's alpha-ketoglutarate? If we go through that Krebs cycle, right? Ding! Alpha-ketoglutarate. So that could keep going, right? And it can have the same path, eventually, to produce ATP. Now, another thing can happen. There is a way to reverse this process, to go back up towards glucose. And what do we call that? Hint, hint, occurs primarily in the liver, a little bit in the adrenal cortex, and other tissues. It's gluconeogenesis, right? There's no surprise it's called gluconeogenesis if we're making glucose, because gluconeogenesis just means making new glucose, right, when you break it down. So these amino acids, if we wanted to use them for this purpose, again, if the body wanted to, it could use them to produce glucose. And we'll talk exactly about how. We'll talk about exactly how that happens tomorrow in relation to what intermediates they are converted from and to, and what steps have to be skipped that are irreversible, right? Because there's some steps in cellular respiration. You can't just go back up the ladder, right? You would think that glycolysis and gluconeogenesis would just be reverse things, but they're not. They're not. You can't do that because some steps are irreversible, right? We need to jump some of those steps, and we'll talk about how tomorrow, but that's a little food for thought. You go sleep on it. I hope you got something out of it. And, pretty much for today, just realize that amino acids could be used to produce ATP or new glucose, or they can be used for anabolic purposes, building muscle via combining to form proteins, right? So that is your quick message of the day, folks. How you people doing? What's going on, Jacob Johnson? Jake Johnson, what's up? Mikey Puccino. And life's all about Quinn. I hope your life is all about Quinn if you're Quinn, because it's your world, my friend. Have a fantastic rest of your night. Happy Win Wellness, you guys, and we'll see you tomorrow, folks. Enjoy.